Hey everybody, Mark here with the Hawk. Yes, I'm still working on it. Tonight I am tackling the task of bleeding the brakes. Now, with these kinds of Tracy O'Brien brakes with this type of hand grip lever, some folks told me, well, what you got to do is turn this upside down, because obviously the fitting is below the NPT fitting coming out of the brake. So obviously you want to bleed from the bottom, with this being the high point versus this. Well, all fine and good. However, this assembly doesn't come off the stick real easily without taking the grip off, and my line wouldn't be long enough to get it up and over. If you take the snap ring off, you can pull it down. That's a huge snap ring, and I have cheap Harbor Freight snap ring pliers, and it just wasn't doing it, and I was afraid of breaking the snap ring in the process and everything else. So what I did was a little bit different. I took, this is leftover primer line for my fuel primer, and I've taken and I put it to the bottom nipple here, and I'm pumping from the top. However, off the wheels, I've got lines coming up, a little hard to see, it's a little dark, and I've got a tube, they tee together, and I have a tube coming out the top. Now, one thing I'll tell you right away, you're gonna find the weak spots in your system. So right away, this little guy shot off, the little brass piece shot right off the plastic part. And this is a cheap Chinese deal off of Amazon, but it was recommended to me to go with this type because it's clear and you can see how much fluid you have left. So I got that back on there, put a clamp on it, and then of course, that was the next thing to shoot off of there. So I put it back on and put a tie wrap on, that side. And then I started pumping it much smaller amounts. Instead of giving it a full squeeze, I was giving it just little pumps. And that seemed to work, and just being really ginger with it. You're not gonna build up pressure in the system. You're just trying to get all the air out and make sure that there's just fluid in there. So right now, I think I've got most of my bubbles out. I'm pumping the brake lever at this point to work any other bubbles out of the system. And I think they're out. In fact, when I started videotaping, there were still some bubbles in there. I was hoping to show you, but it looks like through the course of this, they all rose to the top because the end of my tube, of course, is open. So that's good. I don't believe I have any more bubbles left, and I think I'm ready to start closing the bleed valves, and I should be good to go. I should have brake pressure. Now, you'll notice right away, I removed my seat cushion because I knew I was gonna make a mess. This is hydraulic transmission fluid. So I just got Valvoline Max Life multi-vehicle. It's hydraulic fluid, basically. Automatic transmission fluid. You gotta be careful with using what you use. .3, .5, or automatic transmission fluid, basically hydraulic oil. You got to make sure that the seals in the brake master cylinder are the proper material for the brake fluid that you're using. And some brake fluids, like .3, for instance, can eat the rubber if it's not the right kind. So I asked a friend who uses these brakes a lot, that would be Greg Klemp, what he likes to use, and he said automatic transmission fluid, so that's what I'm going with. So I'm just going to give a little pump here just so you can see, just a little squirt, and you can see how little bit I'm moving it, not very much at all. And there we go. I'm actually not going to pump it anymore because I've got a little bubble from up here that I don't want to chase into my system. So it seems to be going, and I don't appear to have any bubbles. So I'm going to go ahead and close these off. It's a 1/4 inch wrench. I had to go buy one. Not everybody has an open-ended 1/4 inch. It's pretty small. You don't have to be a gorilla and over tighten them. They are needle valve. They just have to be a little bit tight and it will seal. All of my nipples on this airplane were all rounded off because obviously they weren't happy with their brake pressure and they're bleeding, or they thought the system was leaking, and they just absolutely brutalized it. So I had to replace all of those nipples. So I'm gonna put the phone down, close all of these, see if I have brake pressure. I'm gonna leave the lines on for now and see how it goes. I'll come back and let you know how I turned out, and then I'll have to clean up my mess of all this extra hydraulic fluid. Okay, I'm back, and I actually was turning the valves closed when I noticed air in my lines. You can see it here. Here's a bubble. Hard to see here with the flash. There you go. There's a bubble. So I opened back up, and I am going to keep going with the bleeding process a little bit more. This is where it would be nice to have 2 people to do this, because I could have somebody back here watching my brake lines in the back of the gear. But I'm just gonna have to go through this little by little. So I'm going to pump a little more fluid in, just to hopefully chase some of those bubbles out. And we'll see what happens here. Again, not squeezing really hard. I do not want to put huge amounts of pressure into the system. Of course, there's a bubble that just went in. And this is where bleeding from the bottom, truly from the bottom, would be nice, because I'm trying to push some of this air downhill, down the gear. And it would be nice not to have to do that. Now, my tube's getting kind of high. I don't really want to start squirting out the top here, so I'm going to stop squeezing this and start squeezing the brake lever. And I'm just going to make my way. Of course, that always falls, and there'll be hydraulic fluid everywhere for weeks, I'm sure. Keep squeezing my handle, and going to very soon go take a look here at the back of the gear again. Now, it was told to me that having a little bit of air is still okay, because you don't want this handle to be so hard that you have a hard time getting a good squeeze on it. But at this point, I am not going at it with that attitude, because I want to get out as much air as possible, knowing that I won't get it perfect. So hopefully my imperfect attempt at perfect will leave just the right amount of air in the system. And you can see as I'm pumping the brakes, I am squeezing a little bit of fluid out or up. Let's see how this goes here. I'm going to come back around to the back, see if my air bubbles even moved at all. Oh yeah. So a little hard to see right now, but it looking pretty good. Of course, that one's climbing back up, so I need to keep at it with what I'm doing. And I think what I'm going to do is turn off the bottom first instead of the top, because I'm looking really good right now. So I'm gonna give it a few more pumps, chase some of those bubbles back out. And oh, here's a bubble you can see. Finally, I can show you one that's worked its way to the top. So a little bit of patience here, and we hopefully end up in really good shape. So far, I'm pleased with this method. we'll see how it goes. There's another couple of bubbles working their way uphill, and we'll see how this goes here. All right, so I'm gonna get off camera so I can close those back valves and work with two hands, and I'll update you here in a minute. Okay, so I've got all the valves closed here, and I've been pumping the brake, and I don't seem to be building up pressure. So I'm missing something. Obviously, I'm a novice at this, if you couldn't tell. I think what I need to do possibly is open this valve back up, pump a little bit with one hand while I pump this handle with the other, and see if I can build up a little pressure, because I've been just pumping and pumping and pumping, and nothing's happening here. So we'll see what I can do. All right, that seems to have done the trick. I've got the valve closed in again. You can maybe even see I've got pressure on the handle. I can still roll the airplane now. Here we'll try and put in a parking brake valve. Let me try to do that on camera maybe. Let's see here. How am I gonna do that? I'm gonna hold this with my mouth. There, parking brake valve is closed. Look at that. I cannot budge this airplane. It is locked tight. Now, I relieve that parking brake valve, and I'm rolling again. Sweet. There you go. I have bled my brakes, and that's how I did it, and it worked really well by myself. One person with just a little bit of tubing and some T's. Now, I did have, let me go through the parts a little bit here. I've got my primer line in order to fit over the end of this cheap-ass pump, hydraulic fluid pump. I've got a 1/4-inch adapter, and I just ordered these on Amazon. I think it's from an aquarium parts company is where I got them. And I bought these for my fuel system because I've got, for instance, out of the tank for the primer, I've got a 1/4-inch line going, then stepping down into the smaller primer line. I thought for my pitot system that I was going to need these little T's, these little 1/8-inch T's, but I actually had from my primer system before a nice 1/4, 1/8, I think this is 1/8 primer line, 1/4 primer line T, and what they had is they basically had one end of hose clamped off because they just had to go from 1/4 to primer. And so I took that out and thought, great, this is perfect for what I need for my pitot static system, because I've got 2 airspeed indicators, even though I don't need them, because I wanted the altimeter function of the MGL that we talked about before. So I bought, long story, sorry I'm getting long-winded, I bought these little black these little black plastic T's from the same aquarium company, and there's another one of those step downs. So everything's tightened up, everything's good. I'm gonna get out, luckily I did have an oil pan here, so I will disconnect lines and try to drain this hydraulic fluid back into the oil pan and not make too much of a mess. But really happy. This is one of the last things I had to do other than putting the prop back on and putting the sails on, and then I can, with the front sail on, I can put the nose gear in, hook up the steering, and I'm ready to run the engine and fly the airplane. So there you are. Thanks for hawking it with Mark.